Hi guys, and welcome to the first proper roasting video of the Gene Cafe roaster. Here you can see we've got the scoop and the brush, neither of which I've used at the moment. The brush I will be using at the end just to clear out any bits of chaff or what have you. Here we can see the actual little roasting doofer, which is sat in its special little stand, which is shaped specifically, as you can see, to fit the base of this in, and this is where the hot air comes in. This is the lid, and this little thing flapping about there that you can see is the chaff sweeper blade. And those little rubber feet, I was trying to fathom out what they were. It's one of these, it's replacement ones of these, and this does kind of bump and rattle a bit. I've just given it a quick spin just to see what it looks like spinning and to kind of get a bit of a feeling of what's what. I've got 250 grams of coffee beans in this cute little half-litre jug, and these are Nicaragua Matagalpa, and I've chosen those simply because they're the next in my rotation. I usually get a selection of green beans to roast, and these just happen to be the next in my rotation. I've got 250 grams because this helpful little book which came with the Gene Cafe roaster, which is a guide, helpful guide from Bella Barista, on using the Gene Cafe roaster, recommends that that's a pretty good kind of figure, around about 200 to 200, between 200 and 275-ish it says. So I thought I'll go with 250, nice sort of round figure, and we'll see how we go from there. And it gives you a few sample profiles as well. I've been having a read through this today in readiness, and I'm going to go with something like this gentle rise, gentle finish profile, or maybe the gentle rise, slow finish, something like that. So essentially what I need to do is I'm going to start the roaster at 220 and then just follow these guidelines here. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is open the lid and pour in the beans. Now that looks like a lot, but that wasn't actually evened out. That's actually right about the correct level for the dry process beans. Dry process beans, for those who don't know, produce a lot more chaff than wet process beans. Because with wet process, a lot of the mucilage is cleaned off. Dry process are naturally dried in the sun, and they're much more chaffy. And as a result of that, they produce more chaff, so obviously there's more chance of it choking up the chaff filter. Now before, that's never been a concern because it just flies up into the air and it's just like a snowstorm once it starts to release all the chaff, which is fun but messy to clean up. But that's the beans in there. That's 250 grams. I am going to now scoot over to the roaster where I'll show you the controls and we'll lock this in place and start the roast. We're over at the roaster. It's plugged in all ready to go. You can see if I press this it comes on. I'm just going to switch it off for the moment. We're going to open this lid, and this always stops in a default position, that being with the handle slightly sort of facing forward. It slides in with the handle on this side, and it just slides down these channels. Oops, he says. Like so, and just snaps into place. And this is the release lever, which just releases a little catch and allows you to pull it out. So that slides into there. I'm going to leave that open for a moment just so we can kind of see things moving. And I'm just going to start it rotating just so you can see it rotating. It's currently on a too low temperature. I've got it on 60 degrees there and 15 minutes on the time. But this is just to show you the unit rotating, so you can get an idea of what it looks like in operation. And as this rotates and it moves the beans around, it's blowing hot air in through the vent at the back here, and that's passing through here, and then any chaff release goes into here, and the hot air vents into here, and then the hot air vents from the top of that. So I'm going to stop that, so I'll just press that, which puts it onto a cool cycle. I believe there is an emergency stop, which involves you pressing and holding this button. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll just wait until that cools, and then we're going to set this and get on with the roast. As you can see, it stops in this position, which is always with the handle slightly facing you, so that you're able to pull it out like so. The case there is glass, that's Pyrex, and then this is basically metal and plastic components that make up the rest of this. Obviously it's fairly tough, but that said, you don't want to be dropping it or anything. The heater and the fan is on this side, and then the extraction through this side and then into the chaff collector here. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn the time. Let me move this back down so we can see what's going on here. So we'll start it up. So we'll start it up from where we're at. I'm going to rotate the time for, I'm going to set that to 20 minutes because I know we need to be looking at between sort of around about 17 minutes roughly. I'm going to set the temperature by turning this one to 220 degrees, I think is the profile that I'm going for. Let me just double check. Gentle rise, gentle finish, or gentle rise, slow finish. So I think I'm going to go with the gentle rise, slow finish. So the initial temperature is set to 230. Now these obviously are just beginners guidelines. These are what you start with, and then you can tweak this to suit once you've gotten a little bit more feeling of how the thing operates. So what I need to do with this is, as written on the form down here, is 230. Once it reaches 230, I then need to hold that for 2 minutes and then increase it to 240 until first crack begins. First crack, as you will know from watching my previous videos and watching anything about coffee roasting, is when you get the really vigorous first cracking of the beans. And then sort of you hold that for 15 seconds mid first crack on a rolling crack, and then decrease the temperature from 240 down to 235 and hold it there until the end of the roast, which up to 19 minutes. It says on here, if roast time is a bit long, hold it at a higher temperature for a bit longer. If you can't reach first crack in around 14 to 15 minutes, try reducing the 2 minute hold. Hang on, where are we? Yeah, try reducing the 2 minute hold at 230 to 1 minute or 30 seconds, but essentially reducing the lower temperature and increasing the higher temperature to reach first crack earlier. And then you can also mess around with the quantities. So enough of the waffle, let's just get this thing moving because that's what we really all want to see. 230, and then I'm going to press the start button. And I'm going to start the timer on my phone there. You can hear the wiper blade, which sort of swings gently one way and then drops, sort of flops over quite suddenly the other way, hence the rubber bumper which slots into the blade. And as you can see at the moment, it's not hugely exciting, but as you can also see at the moment, the temperature, now this is the temperature measured at the exit vent, so it's not necessarily the temperature of the bean or the temperature in the chamber, but the temperature of the air exiting. So as you can see, this is rising. It's currently up to 9 degrees. This is centigrade, by the way, where 0 is water freezes and 100 is water boils. We are aiming for 230 degrees centigrade. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. I will find out and I will put that on the screen below for those of you strange oddball types who work in Fahrenheit, which makes no sense whatsoever to me. But you can see the temperature's rising there. We're currently at 11.9, 12 degrees, and it's going up, and we're just over a minute into the roast so far. What I'm going to do at this point, because it's going to be incredibly boring for you to just look at this not doing a great deal of anything right now, is I'm going to stop the video at this point and then come back in when we get up to the 230 degrees. Cut back in at this point to say I believe I was in error with regards to the temperature here. I think the first figure is actually the hundreds, tens, and then the ones. So we're currently at 197, not as I initially thought it was sort of 19 point or 15 point or what have you. We're currently looking like we're at about 190 degrees. We're getting that sort of distinctive wheat, sort of wheaty, grassy kind of smell coming through, which you get as your beans warm up. We are currently 5.5 minutes in, and you can see the beans are turning from green to that nice sort of wheatgrass yellow sort of colour. Hopefully you can anyway. Just scooting in a little bit closer before we get to the required temperature, just to show you the beans. You can see a distinct colour change now. We've gone from green to the sort of straw colour. We're now going to the very, very sort of pale brown from the straw yellow colour, and getting a little bit more of a roast odour. We're now at 220 degrees, so I'm just going to scoot the camera back out of the way and get ready for the next step. We're very fast approaching 230 degrees now. We're at 228. The purpose of this sweeper blade that flaps back and forth, incidentally, is to make sure the vent for the chaff is clear and it's not getting clogged up with chaff, which obviously would be a bad thing. We're currently almost 9 minutes in, and we are just about to hit 230. And I'm assuming this will beep or something to tell me it's reached the desired temperature. We're at 229 just now. Right, okay, no beep, but it's actually at 230, so I'm going to start this, my watch timing now for 2 minutes before I increase the temperature up to 240. So we're coming up to 9 minutes 45 seconds, we're coming up to 10 minutes. Right, we're now coming up to the 2 minute mark, which you probably can't see, but we're coming up to 2 minutes on there, which has just passed. So now I'm going to increase the temperature to 240. This can be done on the fly just by turning the dial. That's now going to start heating up to 240 degrees. That took 11 minutes and 40-ish seconds total, including the 2 minute wait time. So now what I need to do is raise it to 240, and we wait until we get a rolling first crack. And from a rolling first crack, hold for 15 seconds and then drop the temperature back down 5 degrees to 235. Now we're coming up towards 14 minutes, we're 13.5 minutes in, and I'm expecting to start hearing first crack happening on a rolling first crack quite soon. Took a little longer to get to a rolling first crack than I'd really have liked. I've also got quite a bit of steam coming out of the chaff, and those beans are looking a little bit darker than, or they're starting to look like they might be getting a little bit darker than I'd normally like. So what I'm going to do, we're almost at 17 minutes, I'm going to hit the cooling cycle right here. And start the cooling down cycle. Now this is something I might look at doing manually for future ones, actually taking the beans out, cooling them more quickly, but for now I'm just going to cool it down, do the whole cycle in the machine. I don't know if this actually blows cold air through as it rotates. I'm assuming it does something along those lines. There's a lovely roast smell, but those beans do look a little bit darker than I would normally like. So I think with this particular bean, I'll need to make some notes on this, and what I would probably have to do for future roasts is either use a slightly different quantity or adjust the temperatures up a little to reach first crack a bit sooner. I'll just have to, this is all part of the learning process, all part of the fun. As long as I've not got an awful undrinkable coffee, then I'll be quite happy, because obviously I don't want to go ahead and waste 250 grams of good green beans. So we'll see how this one comes out. It's going through the cool down cycle right now, and it's cooling down quite rapidly. The exit temperature of the air coming out is dropping down to 160-ish just now. So you can see this is dropping quite rapidly. See already with absolute certainty that that's a much darker roast than I would normally go for. It is a nice even roast, and it doesn't look so dark that it's going to be undrinkable. But it's definitely a much darker roast than I would normally go for, so I'm not 100% happy with that. And it's possible that it's maybe because I was talking and trying to film this at the same time and not standing that close to it, because the camera's quite a way back here. It's quite feasible that I actually missed the beginnings of first crack as it went into the rolling first crack properly, so I maybe have mistimed that a little bit. But this again is something I can work on, and once I've let this cool down, I'm actually going to run another batch through and see how we go. But here we are with the beans. Definitely a much darker roast than I wanted. However, not so dark that they're burnt and undrinkable, hopefully. So we will see how that looks, and what I'm going to do, as you can see, it's just in its purpose-built holder there, but what I'm going to do right now is flip this lid open, and I'm going to just decant them into there, and let me see if I can tilt this down so you can see. Yeah, it's a much darker roast than I would normally go for. I'm hoping that they'll be okay, so we'll see how that goes. I'm not 100% happy with that for a first go, certainly, but I guess it could have been worse. I think I need to pay more attention and get a bit closer and be listening for first crack and what have you. I'm just at the moment passing these between two different receptacles to help cool them down a little bit more, and then these go into a cooling pan. It's essentially a baking tray that I use for that purpose. So I'm just going to go and dump those in a baking pan, and then I'm going to let this whole thing cool down a little bit, and try a different bean through that and see how we get on. A little bit of a quick wrap up on this one, and other than the roast being darker than I would normally have liked, I'm quite pleased with the whole operation of it. It's obviously going to be a learning curve. I am effectively relearning from scratch, because I've learnt to roast in a popcorn popper, and I've learnt to kind of time that and catch that at the right times. The negatives of the popcorn popper are they roast too fast, and they will only do small batches of beans, effectively 60 gram batches. So for a 250 gram weekly batch, which I would normally consume, I've got to do 5 batches in the popcorn popper, allowing them to cool in between cycles. I will normally get a couple, and then I have to let it cool down, and then another couple, and then the last one. And I do have to let them cool in between the double cycles as well, because it does get very hot very quickly. It's a small enclosed space. So this is a whole new kettle of fish. The principle's the same. It's blowing hot air into a chamber, but it's a much bigger chamber, and it's much more controlled. The temperature's more precisely controlled, the timing and everything. So it's going to be a whole new learning curve. I'm impressed with the machine. The quality of it seems very good. The chaff collector, it's all very well designed. It's nice. I like that it's got this guard here, which kind of helps stop you touching anything that gets too hot, because believe me, it does get hot. You can feel the heat emanating from it, as you would expect. It's getting up to 240 degrees Celsius. And I'm impressed with Bella Barista as well, and obviously no affiliation, as I mentioned. Chance would be a fine thing. I would have been delighted had they sent me this free of charge to test, but sadly not. I actually went and bought this. But this little booklet that they send with it, so you get the instruction booklet, which really doesn't give you much information regarding roasting. And this little booklet that they sent with it, which is obviously their thoughts, observations and guidelines, is really helpful. Gives you sample profiles and some hints and tips, and even a colour, a coffee bean colour comparison chart, which is right there. Now you can see my roast is kind of on the dark, heading towards the very dark. which is, I would typically be about there, medium. That's my sort of favoured area. So you've got a nice roast flavour and some nice origin notes as well. So it's definitely too dark for me. What happened there? Maybe I need to tweak some settings a little bit, some temperatures. Maybe I was a bit too preoccupied with filming to start to hear the start of first crack, and I allowed that to go on a little bit too long before I dropped the temperature, which I think is feasible. Maybe I needed to lower the temperature initially, or raise the initial temperature and lower the end temperature a bit more. I don't know. I'll need to experiment and mess around with these things to find out what's what. One more quick note, however, regarding anything that you roast your beans in and anything that you prepare your coffee in. Do remember, and it's surprising how many times I have to mention this to people who start telling me that they have problems with coffee tasting bad, tasting sour and what have you. Coffee is a foodstuff. It does go off. The concern is not so much the bean going off before you consume it, but the remnants that are left in things such as your roaster. So it's important to clean out your roasters, whatever they may be, the popcorn popper or what have you. It's important to clean out your grinder, especially because you get so many remnants of coffee in your coffee grinder. It's beyond belief, and you can end up with rancid remnants of coffee in there, which can really adversely affect the flavour, and obviously whatever method you prepare your coffee with. So do bear that in mind. Coffee is a foodstuff. It is important to keep it clean to help the flavour. What I'm going to do now is allow that coffee to cool, and I'm going to sample it, see how it does. I might wind up using that for the espresso machine for lattes, because a dark roast with a latte is more forgiving. It produces a better crema, and the milk offsets, tempers the flavour, and adds a little bit of sweetness. Although I do like my coffee black, so I will be trying another roast once everything's cooled down. But that's my initial impressions. Hopefully, when I've had a bit of a play about with it, I'll bring you a few more notes on it, and we'll see where we go with that. If you are thinking of getting one of these, I'm really, really impressed with the look, the overall build quality, the look, the packaging, everything. It's a quality product, very, very much a quality product, and certainly much more purpose-built than a lot of the home roasting setups I've seen for sale. So I think on initial impressions and first testing, I can definitely recommend this. It is a learning curve. It is going to require a bit of tweaking and adjusting to get used to it, but I'm happy with that. Now, you might be wondering why I just mentioned the thing about cleaning and coffee being a foodstuff and going sour and what have you. And there's a reason for that, and it just occurred to me while I was filming that last segment that prior to buying this new, I actually had a look online to see if there were any decent pre-owned ones available cheaply, because I do like a bargain. Who doesn't, after all? And I had a look and I saw 2 or 3, not a great deal, which says to me that these are obviously a very popular machine and people keep them, rather than being a fad buy that people buy, use for a couple of times, stuff in a cupboard and then sell. So that's a good sign in terms of when you're buying something new, you've got an idea that it's going to be good. But what I did notice on the 2 that I saw for sale was the Pyrex glass of both of them was practically black. And that's just from the heat of the beans and the residue from the beans. And there's no need for that. And that will affect the flavour. And I can tell you that just from my experience of roasting in a popcorn popper, from my experience of making coffee via pretty much every mean imaginable. And there's absolutely no reason for it. This is a Pyrex and plastic container, and it's easy to clean, and the inner shield actually pops out simply like so, along with this. So you can take the entire thing out, you can give it a good wash in warm soapy water, give it a good wash in here, stand it in your drainer to dry, rinse it, leave it to dry, and you're good to go for the next one. And I would say you don't have to do this every single time, but maybe every sort of 4 or 5 roasts perhaps, depending on how dark you like to roast your coffee. And if you like a dark roast which tends towards oiling more, then you may need to wash it more frequently. But it's just something that occurred to me as I was sort of wrapping up this video, and just from feeling the glass already after that roast, you can feel a thin sheen already on that, and that's just from one roast. It's kind of, in fact, you could probably see there, got a little bit of a greasy residue, you know, and I don't know if that comes across and it's visible on the camera, but that's just from one batch of beans. So just bear this in mind. It is important, and it does affect the flavour of your coffee, and this even applies to things like the cheap machines, like your Keurigs and your Nespressos and that kind of thing, and even your bean to cup machines, because internally they still need to be cleaned, because they will still collect residue and they will get nasty, and it will affect the flavour of your coffee. So it's just a little note, just a wee note to add to the end of that. Here's a little impromptu cell phone filming which I'm tacking on to the end of this video, because the long and short of it was, I was not happy with that first roast. I let it cool. I actually tried a cup, and the flavours of a roast do change over the days, and I tend to find leaving it to rest for at least a day helps to bring out the flavours. But I just wanted to check the roast level and the flavour effect, and as suspected, it did have a very sort of over-roasted flavour. It was too much, and I was too busy. What I did with this one is I put the heat up to 240 straight away and just let it rise to that, waited till first crack, and then dropped it to 235. And what I did notice is I was actually stood right next to it this time around, and I noticed it's actually very hard to hear the start of first crack compared to my popcorn popper. And as a result of that, I definitely missed the start of first crack, the first go around. So that is partially to blame. And additionally to that, I was just too busy sort of trying to focus on too many things at once, I think, and I messed it up. So this one is looking much nicer. Probably still a little darker than my preferred finish, but it's just in its cooling cycle right now. And this one's certainly looking much more palatable, which is good, because this one's a particular Ugandan natural process bean that I really, really like. So I'm looking forward to see what this one tastes like once it's cooled. Apologies for the shaky cam handheld cell phone footage, but this is the batch just out of the roaster on the second go. This is the Uganda natural process, favourite of mine, a really nice one. This is from Coffee Compass, incidentally. Those of you looking for green beans, Coffee Compass have got a really great range, big fan of them. And as I say, I have still got to try the Bella Barista ones, see what they're like. But that is definitely much more my kind of level. Still maybe ever so slightly darker than I would normally go for. This is the last batch from my popcorn popper. As you can see, slight unevenness in the roast, but you can see quite a bit paler. Well, not quite a bit, a little paler in comparison on average, but definitely around about the same kind of level. And that's the first batch. That's the... I'm sorry, it's quite funny when I look at it now. It didn't seem quite so dark when I first took it out, but that's the first batch from the Gene Cafe. And I was obviously far too busy trying to do too many things at once. I really should have just put a batch through first and tried it out. And gotten a bit of a handle on it before I filmed it. But I kind of wanted to introduce you all to the first run on it. And I'll be absolutely honest and say that's not as bad as the first batch I put through the popcorn popper, which I killed spectacularly. They were oozing oil like an overweight man sweating at a gym. They were really, really oozing. And they were horrendous. I did try a cup and they promptly went into the bin. These will go into my... that's my Mazza Super Jolly, which gets used for my espresso machine, which is there. They will go into there, a darker roast. They've got a definite bitter aftertaste. They're not too bad, a bit thin on the body, and they're just overdone. They're basically just overly roasted. These, certainly much more my kind of colour. And what I did with this one just a couple of little notes. That was 250 grams, and I used the 230 to 240 to 235 profile. And this one, I used 200 grams, and I think what I might do for the next one is kind of go somewhere in the middle with a 225, because this one could have done with a slightly longer roast time, which either meant reducing the temperature a little to extend the roast time, because it came into first crack at around about 11 minutes, and it was done by 15 minutes. So either reduce the temperature a little on the same size batch, or increase the batch size a little but keep the same kind of temperature. So what I'll probably do, the easiest option, is go for 225 on the next batch and keep the same sort of temperatures. The other problem with roasting in the conservatory has just occurred to me is the ambient temperature. If I do it during the day when the sun's out, it can get really hot in there. If it's in an evening like this, once the sun's gone in, it can cool down quite rapidly in there. And I always leave the windows open in there for airflow. So it can drop, the temperature can drop quite rapidly. But it's all it's all part of the fun. This is all part of the experimenting. But that looks much more pleasant. It's cooling down nicely. Sorry if I'm annoying everybody by prodding the beans there. But that's cooling down nicely. And once that's cooled down, I am going to try a cup of that and see what it's like. So second go, much happier. As I say, that's my typical, ignore the particularly dark ones there, that's my typical popcorn popper. Uneven roast, but much lighter on average. As I say, that was the first batch, far too dark, heading towards the ooh no thank you, too much category. That one much more in the ballpark. So I've kind of gotten a little bit more idea of the controls now. So now it's just going to be a case of baby steps and trying different things as I go. And we'll see how that goes. So apologies for the tagging on. I just didn't want to leave that video where it was because I really wasn't happy with these, especially after making a cup and tasting it. So I wanted to be completely honest about it and not have you think it was fine. It's not. It wasn't good. It will be fine in a latte. The milk will temper the slight bitterness of the roast, and I have much greater expectations of these. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.